makes you you?
I think the thing that makes me me is that I grew up in a very unusual household with 4 generations living together, and my great-grandfather lived to be 109, and it was the most loving atmosphere you could ever imagine. I got my degree in music, so I was a pianist and taught public school music, but I was a hairdresser for 18 years. Well, actually more. I've been doing hair for 40 years, but I had a salon in Boston, so that was one career, and that was extraordinary. We won Best of Boston for my salon. I had a grand piano in there. We had live music on Wednesday and Thursday nights and Saturdays. It was magical. I'm also an artist and designer, and that has been an amazing career that took me to New York City, where I had my own gallery. I did a major one-woman show at the Toile Museum in Paris. And it's not that I was able to get a major museum exhibit. What it was is where I saw at that level in all of my things, because I've created this massive body of work, and to see it displayed in a museum environment, but to see how it touched people's hearts. And literally leave people in tears. That really was a defining moment. I've been an artist since I was a little girl. Whenever there is a pen or pencil in my hand will just go. It's just something I've done at a very young age. I watched my dad support other artists. Both my parents were musicians, but my father was an art collector. And I saw him support starving artists, literally. I didn't know until many years later that, in fact, there were artists that couldn't pay their mortgages, and my dad would step in and put food on their table and pay to keep a roof over their head. I think my happiest childhood memories were every weekend there were parties at my house, because my parents were musicians and they had friends that were artists. So my father sang opera and lieder. And when the Met would come to New York, they'd then go to Boston, and my parents knew a lot of the famous singers. So I'd be all dressed up, I was a little girl, and with the white gloves, the whole thing, and we'd be picked up in a Rolls Royce. We'd go to the opera, and then we'd all come back to my house, and we're talking people like Beverly Sills, Renata Tebaldi, Peter Glossop, all of these famous opera singers back then would come, and they would party all night at my house and sing for each other. You know, of course, my parents would put me to bed, and I didn't want to go to bed. I wanted to be with the adults to see all this. So we had this grand staircase, and I would be at the top. I would cry because I want to be there. And my mom, somebody would come out and they would see me. So they'd bring me down, and my mom would put me under the piano, and she would say to me, "Little girls are seen but not heard." And they'd first allow me, because I studied piano from first grade on. So I'd get to perform a little bit, and then they'd put me under the piano, and I would just lay there until I would fall asleep, and they let me stay there while they partied all night. It was amazing. It was amazing. I lived in Hong Kong and Tokyo for 5 years, and I got to travel in Asia. I had my big Harley. I had a Heritage Softail Classic. So we took my Harley over to Hong Kong, and I'm not a big person. And in Hong Kong, I started a women's Harley group. And there were only 4 of us that rode Harleys. There were 2 German women, 1 Chinese woman, and myself. And we did a big tour through Singapore and Malaysia, all through Singapore and Malaysia. It was the most harrowing experience of my life, because you're passing, the roads are narrow. And in fact, we found out the week before we arrived that a whole group of riders were killed, that were wiped out, because what happens is the leader has to decide when they're going to pass, and there's always a blind spot. So there's that moment of blindness that you don't know if you're going to get hit or not. So by the time I would get off that bike every day, I would be shaking and trying, it was total insanity. totally crazy. I think the time when I felt truly alive was when I was in a life and death situation, because you realize you potentially could die. So I lived on a 103-foot schooner for a year. We were in the chartering business in the Caribbean, and we were doing a passage from the Caribbean to Boston. And there were 6 crew, and we were out at sea. And in the middle of the night, we were caught in a raging storm. We broke our mainstay, and the boom was over the side of the boat, and I am looking up at walls of water, one after another, just coming at us. And we're not harnessed in, and we're trying to drag this sail out of the water. And I remember looking up and realizing in that moment I could die. And there was nothing stopping us from going overboard. One move and you're done. And I remember in that moment that if I die, I have witnessed probably the most exquisite thing I have ever seen. The sheer power, the likes of which I've never seen, just literally transformed my life. And to realize that I was at the edge of potentially not living through this just shifted everything. From that minute on, I say thank you every moment for every breath I take. Every moment when I wake up the first thing in the morning, I say thank you. So I was living in New York, and I had a gallery in the West Village, and I lived across the street, and I was actually doing quite well because I was doing exhibits in other galleries. I was across the street from Dawn and Karen. She would send all of her designers in to see what I was doing. Diane von Furstenberg sent all her designers in, and I funded my whole business. And I ended up having a situation, and I was very naive. And I was working on a business plan to raise $1 million in capital because it was really the perfect licensing. There's nothing my graphics cannot go on. At any rate, I had a lawyer and accountant who were working on a business plan with me. And I did a collaborative book with this man, Clive Jacobson, who's one of my dearest friends. And we ended up doing a 100-page book that ended up selling in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And we thought, well, let's do the business plan and we'll raise capital, we'll have our own design studio, blah, 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 blah. Well, the lawyer and accountant didn't like that. So they changed their agreement, and they literally turned around and slowly bled me to death financially. And then I ended up in court, literally wiped out financially. That's why I left New York. That was the only reason I left New York. I was down to my last pennies to my name. Got evicted from my apartment in New York, put all my art in storage, what I had left, packed up a little backpack and a roller bag, having no idea where I was going to go or what I was going to do, and surreptitiously got rides down the coast. All I knew at that point, I was never so scared in my life because I didn't know how I was going to survive, where I was going to go, and I knew all I wanted was warm weather and the water. I knew one person in Naples, and I decided to take the bus over. I was so tired. People said, go to Sarasota because you're an artist. I was too tired. I got to Naples. I spent 1 week with a friend there, and then I found a place for very inexpensive. The woman knew I was practically penniless, and from there I had to build my life back. I turned this place into the most precious little pied-à-terre, and didn't tell anyone I was an artist, and said that I was a holistic chef and whatever. And I ended up working for a very well-known nutritionist here in Naples who my landlord told me about, and I was able to put my life back together. I guess one of the things that I would hope they would say is that I've tried my best in life and that I've tried to be as kind as possible to other people. I used to love reading I've done a lot of reading, what people who are on their deathbed and what they have to say about what they would do differently. And it seems pretty much across the board that everybody says the same thing. It's about your relationships with other people. Tell that person you love them. Tell them how great they are. To really love other human beings and listen to them. If I've learned anything, people need to be heard. They need to have their stories heard. Everybody has a story. Because usually what happens is the elderly become isolated and they have no one to share it. And they've started to lose all of their peers. And they just want to be witnessed. They want their, what are we doing? Yes, I created all this art, so what? That's not what it's about. What it is, your life is about touching other people's hearts. That's it. And the connection in a moment in time, when you lock eyes with another human being, how deep can you go? How deep can you go? That's what counts.